Greetings, this is Edward the MetaTutor, and in this video I will be teaching you to work with files in Python. You can see a list of some of the basic things that we'll be doing today on the left side of your screen. On the right side of the screen I'll be writing the code. One of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually open up this file and work with it. So I'm going to exit out of it. As you can see, I'm working on a new operating system. I'd love to talk about that at the end of this video. I've built a new PC, I'm using Arch Linux, which is one of my new favorite operating systems. I love working with Linux, but don't want to talk about that too much right now. I want to write some code. Uh, File operations are centered around one simple command. It's really straightforward, or at least basic file operations are. Um, you need a variable of some sort because this function is going to return a file object, and I'm just going to call mine file, and I'm going to set it equal to open, and so that's the built-in function. If you follow me over here, you can see, oops, looks like I'm scrolled down a bit, but here's a list of built-in functions in Python, and it's right here, open. So it's built in, you don't have to do anything. It's just like using the absolute value function. You just type out the name and it will work. So file, open, and then you need the file name. The open function, I believe it requires at least one parameter, and that parameter is the file name. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to see I have a canvas.txt file. You have to be working with text files. If you're working with like a doc file, I don't think it's going to work because that is a proprietary file type made by Windows or by Microsoft Word. And not only is that an evil corporation, it's also a very complicated file type. It's plain text is what we're working with here. So what does this do? Well, this is all we need to do. And what this does is this opens the file for reading. And when I say open the file, I don't mean that a new screen is going to pop up on your computer. If you're on Windows or if you're on Mac, you're not going to get a new like text edit or notepad application or like window. It's not going to appear, and you're not going to be able to edit it. What you're opening is I believe it's called a data stream. I might need to double check that, but essentially this is a way of getting data out of a file, and you can actually read about that in this little section over here about object. It returns a new featureless object. Let's see. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Boom. So it opens a file object, I believe it talks a little bit, in file object about how this works. See, they refer to it as a stream. If you're interested in that, please go ahead and read more. But it's beyond the scope of what we need to know to simply tackle the problem at hand, which is reading data from a file. Once you've opened a file, I always go ahead and I write close at the end, file.close, and that's the function that you use. It has to be file.close. It's dot notation because file is an object, and objects have functions as part of their objecthood. So the file object that we're using, it's called file. You could name this anything you want. It doesn't have to be named file. Sometimes I call them just FO, meaning file open. But I'm going to name it file because I like the color that comes up. I think file is another function, and that's why it's getting colored that way. But I digress. We've opened the file, and we've closed it. And what can we do once we've opened it? Well, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type file.read, and then I'm going to print that. So if I do file.read, actually I'm not going to print it yet. Let's go over and run it. Nothing happens, right? So I do need to print it, but what I need to do first is I need to, set an actual variable equal to file.read. And so the way that I'm going to do that is, the way that we do anything, or create any variable, text equals file.read. Go ahead and print text. So that's going to get all of the text out of the file. And it's just printing it to standard output. If you're using idle, which obviously I'm no longer using idle, I'm using my terminal. But if you're using idle, then this is what's going to print out on your Python shell. It's just going to print all of this good stuff right here. And all of this good stuff right here is what's inside of that file. So if I go open up that file, canvas.txt, you can see it's the same stuff. So that's what we just did, that first step right there, create a file object using open file name. We read data from the file object using file.read. There are other ways that you can read data, which we'll get into right now. Essentially, the most straightforward thing here is, we can add in a parameter to read. If we put in, the number 1, let's see what happens. It just reads the first letter. If I put in the parameter 2, it'll read the first 2. So, you can see as I assume, or I'd like to think that you can assume what would happen from there. If I put in 10, it'll give me the first 10 characters or letters, and so on. There are a few other commands, for instance, read lines, or read line, will read one line at a time. So file manipulation in Python, it gets the, technically there's a /n at the end, it's invisible, and it means a new line, and that's why it's printing a new line right there. And if you want to see those new lines a little bit more obviously, then use the readLines function. The readLines function gives you a list. And so now you can see it's a little bit cluttered and ugly, but it's a list where each of the lines is stored into a new entry in the list. And so you can see the /ns right there because that indicates that it's the end of a line. So those are the basics for reading. We have 3 basic commands you can use: file.readLine, file.readLines, and then the simpler one, file.read, which can accept an integer as an argument. And with those, you can read in any type of file exactly as you want to, by however many characters at a time you want, or by reading it line at a time. So now that we have learned how to read from a file, I want to talk about some of the other operations we can do with a file. You can write to files, but you can also create files. And to do that, we're going to modify this line right here. I have it on line 4. Essentially, if I change this and I provide a character w as the second argument, the second argument is the mode. And so essentially, the open function requires 2 parameters, 2 arguments. The first one is the file name, and the second one is the mode. And mode can equal R for read, W for write, and R plus for read or write. And I believe that there are a few more, but those are the ones that I'm concerned with. If you are using the W mode and the file doesn't exist, then Python will go ahead and create that file. So right here, I'm just going to create s.txt. And if I run this code, so I'm going to come over here, exit out of that, and run that code. You can see in my folder now, I have s.txt. I guess I could have, shown you my folder, the contents of this folder beforehand, but let's go ahead and, prove it. So now we're going to do e.txt. All right, so Python canvas.py, and then ls, and boom, there it is. And it creates it, and it creates it as a blank file. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So from there, now that we have write permissions, that means we can write to it. So, we've created a file. If the file already exists, I'm not exactly sure if it'll overwrite it. We can go ahead and test though. Let's do a file.write, and you can just write text to it. So write hello world, and then close it. So let's go ahead and run that code. I'm going to have to get back there really quickly. And I'm back. So let's go ahead and run this code. Python canvas.py, boom. And then let's see what's inside txt. e.txt, hello world. Awesome. So let me do it again, and this time let me go back, and I'm going to change it to by file. I don't know. Let me run the code. Again, e.txt exists, And yeah, it looks like it overwrote it. Um, there are a few reasons for that. Um, I'm curious if hello world is like as many letters as by file is. Oh no, it isn't. So yeah, it just totally overwrote the file. And so, consider that a danger when working with um, the W command. If you're going to open up a file that already exists, you might do some damage to it. Um, Especially if you write at the beginning of the file. Um, but anyway, the next thing that we'll talk about is, let's see, canvas.txt. Looks like we've already learned how to write data. It's kind of straightforward. It's the file.write command. The last and final thing is to process data from a file. And so this is, I'm going to use an example for this, and it'll be a demonstration of ways that you can use this nifty new tool set to make your life easier.